but people see everything through a certain prism, you know. So
yeah.
I try to point out that not the difference is not because I try to prove that I'm different, but to prove that I have something special, you know, in my culture as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important.
Bohdan, it's so lovely to meet you here on Zoom.
Likewise.
And you play a very interesting instrument, the Bandura.
Yes, correct. I can actually show it if you'd like.
Yes, please. That would be great.
I will, if it's okay, I will not play today because I took a 2-week break.
Yeah.
Because I have some big concerts coming up and I'd like to cleanse my mind and fingers a bit before. But I'll grab it.
Fine. Yeah.
So this is one of my 2 beauties.
Wow. Is that beautiful? Oh, that is beautiful. Can you just pluck one string? I want to hear the sound of it.
Of course, I'll pluck more than one. Let me just disconnect my microphone. Can you hear it well?
Yeah. Oh, it's got yeah. Wonderful. But now tell me, this is for me, it's an unusual instrument. It's not something that that you see in orchestras every day. Can you tell me more about it?
Yes, of course. So the instrument has a really long tradition in the territory of Ukraine. It was played on since around the 7th centuries when we have the first written mention of the instrument. And it was in the Greek and Arabic chronicles of travelers passing through Ukraine. And they noticed this instrument, which they couldn't describe what it was, so they called it Bandura.
Oh, I see.
And that's where the name Bandura comes from. So the instrument itself is developed from a smaller one, which is more in a form of a wing, like this.
Yeah.
Within time, it was used to accompany singing of psalms, religious songs, and so on. And within time, it was used to more in popular culture. And the high point of this was during the Cossack era, the so-called Ukrainian Cossack Baroque, Kosatsky Barocco. So the Baroque music of the Ukrainian, as soon as the Cossacks became more settled in, throughout the 17th century, the instrument became the court instrument of choice. For leaders like Ivan Mazepa, you might know from several musical and literary works of his name, from Victor Hugo, from Liszt wrote a whole poetic musical poem on Mazepa. Tchaikovsky wrote so it was a part of the popular culture. And at that time, also the instrument became more shaped to a Western lute.
Okay.
Which is why also this double, it's more of a representation out of a practicality that the double head tends to break. I had the strings from this one taken off.
Yeah.
But this is a Baroque thing you see in the Baroque instruments of Western Europe. Main difference between a bandura and a lute, though, is that a bandura is carved out of one piece of wood.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Which gives it a very specific sound compared to that of a lute, which was built in such a way that the richer the musician, the more, or the one who commissioned it, the more ribs it had.
Okay. So if you say it's carved out of one piece of wood, that means if you turn it around, so it was hollowed out on the inside.
Correct. And this had to do with several reasons. First of all, the instrument was played primarily by peasants from a certain point. And of course, in the Russian-controlled Ukraine, where the instrument came from, meaning the Russian Empire, the instrument, they did not have the materials, the glues, the capacity to build such complex instruments, so which is why they carved them out of themselves. And each musician was supposed
Amazing.
to, after 3 years of study on the instrument, after 3 years, he was allowed to play it. First, he had to study for his repertoire. He had to follow his musician, which were mostly blind men. There was a tradition kept by blind musicians.
By blind musicians.
Yes, the instrument was played primarily by blind people.
And why is that?
I guess, and to a certain extent, first of all, everybody back then needed a career as well.
Yeah.
And in the Ukrainian mythology, Ukrainian folk culture, blind people were seen as someone who had special connection to God.
Oh, I see.
Because blind people, blind persons, they were not able to see all the evil that went on in the world. So they were seen as especially pure. And of course, out of a medical point of view, many people back then had cataracts, for example, and other diseases which made them blind as well. Also, measles, I believe, is the name of one of these that led to blindness. And these people needed a career option out of a purely modern economical point of view. I can say that. So the instrument was carried out mostly through blind people, but in the 19th century, during all of the laws forbidding the public usage of Ukrainian language in the Russian Empire, the instrument became very, and the people who played it were beaten. Often their instruments were broken by the Russian police because their music was purely, on one hand, they had the sacral music, the Ukrainian psalms, variations, songs about the truth and the untruth, a lot of these different moral stories they were passing through. And on the other hand, they had, so of course the ruling elites did not like this, And on the other hand, they were preserving the history, the culture of the people through the stories of the uprisings, the farmer and Cossack uprising against the first the Ottomans, Turks, then against the Poles, and then finally against the Russian elites. So this led to the fact that instrument was really bent to decline and was almost brought back from death beginning of the 20th century.
Okay.
When it gained much momentum, but then of course during the 20s it flourished. It went from about 7 people who actually played it professionally in 1904 to a total of over 900 orchestras with this instrument alone in 1920 around. And in 1930, Stalin persecuted the musicians again. There was an even so-called gathering of 300 of these kobzars, they were called, and they were all executed at once. Now, we do not know to what extent this event happened as such at once, but we do know that there was many death orders for many of these musicians. But because the instrument had a very sacral meaning to the Ukrainian nation.
Okay. Mm. But now, so how old were you when you started to, or when you discovered that you wanted to play this instrument?
Since I can remember.
Really?
And I have a picture of myself with the statue of this instrument in our hometown, Ivano-Frankivsk. It's former Galicia, former Austria. There's a monument to a cymbal player, the dulcimer, and a bandura player. So in my region, the dulcimer was an instrument of choice. This had many reasons. One of the reasons was we had connections to Western European cities where they had piano manufacturers. Of course, they made, metal strings as well, and they had metal pegs and better quality glues and materials so they could build something to uphold the pressure of that. Whereas a bandura, until the turn of the century, was using primarily catgut strings, which is typical also for the violin until, I believe, 1890 some. And there's a statue, and we used to go to my grandmother's house, who lived on the other side of the street. Every weekend we would spend with the grandmother. And I remember the statue from since I can remember anything. And I always said I wanted to play this instrument.
That is so wonderful that you had that desire from that age, from such a young age. And now, was it then easy to get somebody to teach you the instrument?
Yes and no. I mean, getting someone to teach you the instrument was easier than getting the instrument itself, because there's a really big decline since 1990. There hasn't really been many manufacturers who've been making it. There's around maybe 35 to 40,000 instruments in the world, which for a country of, I mean, there's 60 million Ukrainians in the world. That puts it into perspective. Now, when I was 8 years old, we emigrated to the United States. A year later, a Bandura teacher emigrated as well. And I started learning with her. And then I started commuting to Toronto from Buffalo, New York, where I lived, every weekend. And I started learning in Toronto. But I had luck that my teacher was extremely famous and an extremely good teacher. And he opened this whole new world of, you can say, I call it Ukrainian Baroque and Ukrainian Renaissance music. Renaissance, not in the sense of pre-Baroque, Renaissance in the sense of this 1920s avant-garde Renaissance we had in Ukraine.
Okay.
And then I started talking and communicating with people like Julian Ketasti in Berlin, in New York, who's really famous. Teachers in Kiev, teachers in Ivano-Frankivsk. It's gotten to the point that at a certain point, I was the only active Bandura player in, I believe, in the German-speaking world. Until recently, there's been several ladies who fled and men who played the Bandura who are now located in Vienna. They contacted me because they were fleeing in such a way that they didn't even grab their instrument. One of them only grabbed a pair of sweatpants and the jeans she had on, and she had to flee with her 15-year-old daughter. Instruments, everything is at home as soon as she heard the bombs falling next door. So the history repeats itself. I studied at the Diplomatic Academy, and I studied at the Slavic studies. So my specialization is Eastern Europe. And I must say that I believe in some cases music is the best diplomatic tool there is, because how often I'm confronted with the question, is that a balalaika? I mean, disregarding the shape and everything in different countries and 3,000 kilometers distance, disregarding this, you have to imagine that balalaika has 3 strings, my instrument has 70 strings.
Oh, yeah.
But people see everything through a certain prism, so
Yeah.
I try to point out that not the difference is not because I try to prove that I'm different, but to prove that I have something special, in my culture as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important, because it is repeating itself, and we have the situation now where in the occupied territories under Russian troops, I cannot even call them troops. They're destroying books. They're burning authors. They have lists of authors they have to burn. They're destroying instruments. They're robbing museums and stealing everything. Today they stole over 3,000 articles from the Mariupol Museum and took them out to Russia. It's a constant story of stealing, and it breaks my heart, because I know that my parents went through similar situations, and my grandparents were born in the Gulag for being who they are. And to see that happen again now under the pretext of the great Russian culture. But if you look at this great Russian culture, you see that purely Russian people there are in a minority. If you look at Tchaikovsky, Stravinsky, Prokofiev, Chekhov, Bulgakov, Anna Karenina, and so on. They all were from the Ukrainian territories, but also there's Belarusians and other nationalities, and they all were forced to work under this great empire. And I think it's important to decolonize this. But at the same time, the Bandura is something so specifically Ukrainian.
Yeah.
And it's so specifically Ukrainian because the Russians tried to destroy it. And I'm saying Russian on purpose because it didn't matter if it was a Russian empire, if it was Soviet Russia, or if it's Russia under Vladimir Putin. So I have something here in my hands, which cannot be taken away from us.
And now tell me, you were in America, and you say now that your teacher there helped you, and you could play and learn the instrument. Was it also the fact that it's something very special that drove you to carry on? Because I mean, you must have had many obstacles apart from learning to play the instrument, other obstacles as well, that you had to overcome.
You know, I never well. It's an interesting situation because, like I said, if you play I started off with the violin when I was 6, and piano when I was 9 or 10. And my teacher always told me, you can continue playing violin and piano, and you must, in order to have a proper musical education. I mean, I did not have the opportunity to visit a conservatory or the Bandura in Toronto. But he said, think of it this way. You're going to be 18 years old playing the violin, and there will be a child in China who will be playing 10,000 times better than you already. But you play an instrument which nobody plays, and it is both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it opens your eyes to so many different things. It becomes your passport. You know, with the Bandura now I travel once a month at least, giving performances internationally, and I have the ability to be a cultural diplomat for my culture, specifically in my country as well. On the other hand, it is also a type of a curse because you have to repair the instrument partially yourself. A lot of things you have to take care of yourself. You know, there is a whole generation of Bandura players who were executed. So their works, oftentimes I have above me here books, my little small library here in Vienna, and you do have to practice and learn things partially yourself because nobody will show you. You know, that author, one of my favorite composers, he was not able to do everything. So we do have, for example, a 3-minute segment of him playing in a movie because he was also an actor. And through this, we try to recreate and see, you know, it is to a large extent, it's mechanics and physics, but you have to get to his levels. It's like detective work, you know. It's also, you notice sometimes that the music has been rewritten. Just there was a mistake in the notes. So it's a discovery work. It's a project for a whole lifetime. So also now working full time, it is becoming difficult, but this is not a work for me. This is it's a passion, I would have to say, because, you know, and I do have 2 students now, and then I try to show them certain things which I know already I've been playing for 2 decades now almost. I try to show them certain things, and their jaws drop in awe that there's such Ukrainian music that exists. You know, where you have a concerto for 15 banduras and 30 male singers, for example, and I play them some of these old recordings from the 50s that I have on a record player, on a how do you call it, vinyl, and it opens up a whole new world for them, you know. And it's something that still amazes me, but something I know, you know, and I see the importance in this.
And now, these students that you have, do they also have this passion that you have, that they want to carry on and carry this music on, or do they just do it for interest?
The passion comes with it with time. I noticed with one of my students, she's older, you know, she's not like the young boy who's starting out. I see her passion growing with every lesson. I also see how difficult the instrument is. You know, for me, it was never a question of difficulty. For me, I just practice. No, maybe it's because I still grew, and it sounds silly because I'm so young, but I did not have a cell phone until I was 17 or 18. You know, so I did not, parents didn't really love for video games and so on, neither did I want to have them. So I spent my free time practicing, you know, and thousands of hours of practicing, and nothing seems difficult. But of course, when I'm playing with her, I'm questioning myself, how did I do that back then? You know?
Really? Yeah.
Because it is a difficult instrument.
Now, you said that not many people make these instruments. So is this something that, how do you think you will be able to say, get that in the future? Is there a new wave of younger people that are interested?
There are, and there are people who repair instruments, who improve instruments, who take simpler instruments without the chromatic keys that switch automatically. I mean, semi-automatically. There are people who make that. On the other hand, I think there has been a great growth and interest in the Bandura. And I mustn't say that there are no makers of the instruments.
Yeah.
There are some. It's just that compared to the, for example, if I wanted to repair my instrument right now, there's only one person I can trust that I know in the world who would repair the instrument. And that involves driving 1,300 kilometers with the instrument, changing trains 3 times, and then coming back to pick it up. That's the difficulty, I'm saying.
Yeah.
My dream would be if I save up enough money to, and I have the blueprints for all the instruments that I like, is to get a nice flute maker in France, for example, or Italy, and commission that instrument with them. The difference is that money, and time. But that's a project for the future.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you have the wish and the dream to do it and the aspiration to do it. So I think it will happen. You're still young. There's still many things that can happen.
I am still young, but if anything, these days have taught me, these last weeks, you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's true. But now, so you have a concert now. You say you have a concert coming up in 2 weeks' time. Tell me about this concert.
So most of my performances right now are just commissioned things. So the next one I'm playing, I don't want to spoil it yet because I'm still waiting for the contract. But the one after that, this one will be in Vienna. But the one after that will be at my first Baroque and Old Music Festival, early music festival in Stockholm. And I'm hoping that this one will open up new doors for me. Because I think this is also another thing. If I tell people I play a Ukrainian instrument, they automatically assume Ukrainian dance with the big pants and jumping in the air and folk music. This is not folk music. Of course, I can play folk music, but I prefer to say I play authentic music. The old, authentic, but also I can also play Beethoven. I can also play Mendelssohn, Handel, Brahms, and so on. So this is not. This is just an undiscovered instrument in the West. It's not a folk instrument in the pure sense. This is my teacher always taught me, and I agree with this highly. You're playing authentic music. There's a difference between I don't know, taking an object and printing, I don't know, a mug and printing a Ukrainian ornament on it. That's folk, but a hand crafted pottery baked in the traditional ways that have been there for thousands of years, that's authentic for me. And that is a big difference, and that also applies to the music. As to Vienna, Vienna is a very difficult place for music, for newcomers. I think that's regular. It's like people say, if you make it in New York, you make it anywhere. The same with Vienna. If you tell someone in Vienna you play Ukrainian instrument, I mean, until 2 months ago, they would have said, okay, we're not interested in folk music, But you give them your repertoire, but you don't do folk music, Whereas, 30 kilometers outside, folk music is highly expired. Even though, like I said, I do not play folk music, but this stereotypes. If you come to Vienna, you have to have Mozart in your repertoire or something. But there's so many hundreds of composers we don't know about yet. Even I don't know about yet.
Do you can you play then any music with the Bandura? Can you? Okay.
So I have 5 octaves.
Yeah.
So only the piano only has 1 octave lower and 1 octave higher. So everything in between I have double layer strings. I don't know if you can see it. It's 2 layers of strings.
Yeah.
So it's like the black and white keys, and I have 10 fingers. So I can do anything a piano can do. Okay, there are some difficulties that I wouldn't try. Maybe it's possible, but my latest project I've been taking Philip Glass and Avo Pärt music, piano or harp scores, and I just play them. Of course, it's difficult technically speaking sometimes, because these instruments have not been written for. This music has not been written for the Bandura, but it's all possible. Another thing is now I'm taking old harpsichord concertos from Dmytro Bortnyansky, a Ukrainian classical composer, and I play them on the Bandura. And the sound and the resonance is very similar to the harpsichord.
Yeah, I can imagine with the strings. So now, when you have to change your strings, for example, where do you get these strings? Are they specific?
So I did get 2 sets of strings before all of this happened, but in reality, you take guitar strings. Works just as fine. but you need to have the right size. So I have a special tool. I don't know what it's called. It measures the width of each string. And with this tool, I write it down and I go to the guitar store and I ask them if they have the string. Usually you have to buy a set of 5, or some stores do have specific ones. And depending on the instruments, of course, I have to shorten them. I take 3 fingers length past the peg, I cut it, then I have to unwind, it's a lot of technicalities that you have to know. For example, you have to know that the inner if it's a wound string, the bass strings, the deeper strings, it has to have a hexagon core. Otherwise, to take off the bronze, it has to also be a bronze winding. There are different things like that, So it's not that difficult. People are very creative. The Ukrainian refugee Bandura players after World War II, they started using metal strings for the first time, and their fingernails are breaking because we play with fingernails. So what they did, they went to the displaced person's camp's kitchen, and they took the fish bones, and they will glue the fish bones on their fingernails and pluck with it. So the human soul person is very creative. So
if there's a will, there's a way.
Definitely.
This is amazing. And now these ladies that you said that came from the Ukraine without their instruments, are they being looked after, and can they play or have some?
Well, one lady, for example, she is from Kiev. Her concert instrument, like any good violinist or I don't know, clarinet, we have several instruments usually. So they usually have the child instrument they started with. So one lady, she was in Kiev. She fled with her son to without the instrument, just with the backpack, to Zhytomyr, and then the Russians started bombing Zhytomyr as well. But she did have her childhood instrument there. So she grabbed the instrument on the way she escaped to Austria. She's in the countryside now. So I actually gave her 2 of my students. I gave her 2 because I think she needs it more than me now. And she has an opportunity to practice. But yeah.
Wonderful that you thought of that and helping her. But now, Bohdan, tell me, what is your wish for the future?
That, my wishes are coming true every day currently. I think most of the world, I was looking for a job for a year and a half, last year and a half. I am not employed. I have a home that I love Vienna. I'm very happy here. I'm between my 2 worlds, between Galicia and Ukraine and between the US. But most importantly, nobody dares ask me anymore on a daily basis, but you're Russian, right? Or you speak the same language. No, so it sounds silly, and it's very painful that it took so many thousands of deaths again. But we are, for the first time in history, widely seen as a subject of history, of culture. People see that we are very distinct from Russians. And it sounds silly saying this in the 21st century. It would have sounded even more silly saying this 3-4 months ago. But it's part of my identity, and it was being denied until then. And also now with the music, I'm getting phone calls every 3-4 days asking me to perform. That's making me happy that there's a desire to learn about Ukrainian music, about Ukrainian culture. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also, I agree with you. It's very tragic what happened, but I think it has opened the world's eyes to your beautiful culture and the very brave people that come from the Ukraine, and that you have a leader that is, such a strong character that stands with these people. And I think there's much that we will take down in history, in spite of the sadness, but there will be very positive messages coming from the Ukraine, I think, for the future.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's a nice note to round it up. And that's the thing that, I'm getting goosebumps now. Okay. Because I think there is no Ukrainian who did not have a tragic history back in his grandparents' life or so. The famines, the pure destruction of everything Ukrainian. Mm-hmm. And the first thing people tell me when they see me is, You are so brave.
Really? Yeah.
And it's just people laying themselves underneath the tanks. It's the people who are persisting. The grandmother who poisoned 8 soldiers who invaded her house. It's the woman who dropped down a drone with a bottle of pickles under her balcony. She, that's a Ukrainian spirit, which is why it's so hard to govern the country in peaceful times. But it's the truth,
Well, what can you say? That comes to your advantage now, or that spirit. It's to your advantage. I think it's lovely that you, as a young man, that you're so proud of this instrument and that you pushed through and played it and wanting to play it, and that you looked at the statue and said, "This is my dream. I want to play such an instrument." Even though it was not a popular thing to do, I think that's great. I really admire you for that. And I wish that I could, that you could have much success as a musician with this instrument.
Thank you. I'm positive of it. That's gonna come.
Yeah. But now I want to ask you just a last question. You say you live in Vienna now, so do you have a favorite restaurant or a coffee shop here in Vienna that you can name?
Yes, I'll name Karl Ludwig in the Favoritenstrasse. It's a cafe that opened up exactly the month my postgraduate studies at the Diplomatic Academy started.
Yeah.
And I did several performances there, and it's just such a warming place, and the restaurants at the moment, I wouldn't be able to name you one, because during Corona I started cooking for myself that I think that I cook better than half the restaurants.
Oh, okay.
It sounds arrogant, but cooking for me and food is something very intimate. When I eat at a restaurant, it's not as intimate for me. But on the other hand, coffee is something that goes around and is shared.
Yeah. So it's part of this whole atmosphere when you drink coffee somewhere. I agree with you totally. Yeah. Bohdan, thank you so much for this lovely, inspiring interview, and I wish you all the success with your instrument, and I will be following and seeing what you are doing, because I really find it very interesting.
Gladly.
Yeah.
I'll send a CD and some information your way if you'd like.
Oh, that would be so great. Thank you so much. And let me know when you do a concert again here in Vienna.
Very gladly.
Okay. Have a lovely evening, and thank you so much for your time. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.